Conor.
Omar.
Eric.
Omar.
Conor, we have a little bit of a controversy here. This is our first in-person podcast in about 4 years, right? In 2019.
That sounds right.
It sounds about right. For us, for the hosts, right? The still current hosts. Now, Conor, if you look around, can you please describe this room briefly for the audience that cannot see behind us or around us?
So we're in a very delicious pine room, which is a very popular style in Ireland. Mm-hmm. We're situated next to an infamous brothel.
Yeah.
Now a restaurant.
Unrelated.
Unrelated, now a restaurant. I'm just adding colour and flavour. There are 3 beds. I cannot confirm or deny how those beds were arranged last night. I only came in the morning, where it seemed to be hastily rearranged. It's a warm room. As I learned, there's some warm colours in the room.
Yep.
Yellow and orange. Have I done a good job?
So you've done a sensational job, and that's the controversy I wanted to bring up. Jay's also here. So Jay, the hype train, and he could confirm with a simple yes. Jay, last night were there 2 beds instead of 3 beds in this room?
Yes, sir.
That's a yes, sir.
That's a yes, sir. That's confirmed.
Yeah. Eric, what is this whole bed situation that's been going on here? Where, as I understand it, there's 3 of us, you, myself, and hype train Jay. Conor's the guest. And there are 2 beds, and now we have 3. What happened?
Well, it's very simple. When I booked online, you hadn't yet secured a cameraman. So in typical Iron Culture fashion, I was left to figure out things on my own.
Yep.
So I booked a room for 2 people because I didn't want to accidentally overbook.
Yep.
And then when we got here, I requested that they add a 3rd person in the room. And they said, hey, well, you've come too late. We don't have our staff in at the moment to change the bed. So it's currently set up with a double and a single. And tomorrow morning, you can come in and change it. And then I said, that's perfectly fine. You started to talk over me and try to suggest that maybe we didn't do that. I moved in front of you. Things fell over.
Tension's increasing.
I'm hooked. Tarantino.
And ultimately, we did that. We slept last night with the configuration that Jay confirmed.
The spoiler is that we slept together last night. That's what I was.
Just get to the point.
Yeah, they got it.
Important.
That's the point. We went from Tarantino to
Which beds?
This guy over here. Oh, I booked the room wrong.
I booked it, guys. I booked it. I knew you didn't book it yet and didn't get the videographer. Therefore, I was left with no choice but to book 2 beds instead of 3. We knew there was going to be a videographer.
Okay. So after a night of hot sex between Omar and I, then we went downstairs and changed it because I'm uncomfortable with my masculinity and my sexuality, and here we are. Is that what you want? Is this what you want? Is this what you want?
Hey, this sounds like a confession. We are now.
Duck out for a few minutes.
We are reunited. We are in Ireland. We are here in Dublin with the main man himself, Dr. Conor Heffernan, who was also with us at the Sheffield meet, which is what we'll be discussing, the implications. And I think, Eric, probably it makes sense to kick it off over to Conor, who could probably frame Sheffield, what was going on. And then, you were behind the scenes. You were a coach on game day, right there in the thick of things. You saw things that they did not see, so you could give a unique vantage point. And then we want to talk about the user experience, Sheffield as a whole, the greater implications. So maybe, Conor, do you want to kick it off about Sheffield? Then we'll go into the coach's corner.
Yeah, perfect. So I think Sheffield, for someone who's a fan of powerlifting, had that sort of aura that you see in other sports. So bodybuilding in 65, you had the Olympia. Let's take the champions from all the other shows and pit them against one another and see what happens. World's Strongest Man, to a certain extent, although that started more as an entertainment piece, I'd say more like the Arnold Strongman. Let's get together the bodybuilder, the powerlifter, and the strongman and see who's the strongest person. So for me, as an outsider, this had the same mystique. I know, we see these people competing on a regular basis, but I think the tight cohort and the fact that you could do more of a comparison between a Jesus and a Taylor. To a certain extent, I know we had these formulations before that, but I think it had the aura of all of the champions brought together. Let's see who's the top dog in both divisions. So within a sort of historical context, it has the potential to be a centerpiece alongside, worlds, nationals, etc. And I think that's, as an outsider, that seems to be the line that they're trying to toe. We're bringing the best of the best together. Mm-hmm. Let's see what happens. And I think every other strength sport has that to a certain extent.
Yes. Eric, I want to kick it over to you because you have been to Worlds, IPF Worlds. You've been to many high-level events, and Sheffield was slated to be arguably the next big thing. And what does the next big thing mean? Kind of what you alluded to, Conor. So one, champions against champions. So it's a unique kind of way of framing it, as well as increased monetary compensation, right? A level that previously, as far as I'm aware, when it comes to tested powerlifters, has never been done before. In terms of scale, right, the auditorium paid people attending the highest level. So it was slated before it actually happened, and I want you to set this up then, Eric, and then we'll talk about the experiences, to be arguably the biggest tested powerlifting meet ever. I think that's a fair statement, right? I'm all saying that. So that's what it was. It was supposed to happen, and then the, COVID, the pandemic occurred, and now we are here, what, 2 years? 3 years later. 3 years later, it actually happening. We all got to experience it. There are many thoughts. Eric, you have been and you've attended world events, because I think that is, at least when it comes to everything around it, like how the meet went, the athletes, how they're treated, the back room, the prestige associated with it. You've been to many high-level events. Talk to us about Sheffield from that standpoint.
No, I'm really glad you framed it up that way because, for one, I think for the uninitiated or people who just haven't been on the other side of the camera, world level events are not exactly what you'd expect. So just for specific context, I coached Bryce Lewis at both the 2017 IPF Worlds in Belarus as well as 2018 in Calgary, and I also did some coaching with NZPF at that meet as well. And most of the time, not always, IPF events are done where it's affordable for the federation, just to be candid about it.
Yep.
And that's not always necessarily destinations where you're going to get a lot of audience attendance.
Yep.
And not just geographically where they are, but sometimes locally where they are. So for example, you would think, okay, IPF Worlds in Texas, that's cool. What, Houston, Austin, Dallas? No, Killeen. And that's a very small place, but it was financially feasible. And let's be honest, this is a niche sport, totally understandable. Belarus, it was in a similar location. The people in the audience, it was basically the other powerlifters from the other sessions and their significant others who traveled with them there and their coaches. I loved it. I was sitting in the audience watching the rest of the meet after I'd done coaching the 93 session with Mike T. We were, having a good coach's corner talking, looking at all this stuff, but stands are empty all around us, and people don't realize that. So worlds are actually often sometimes the least pressure environments. And that's not true competitively, but in terms of feeling as though the world's eyes are on you. Calgary in 2018 was a little different because that's actually a pretty good location.
Yep.
It's in the middle of the city, and it's a very transportable area, and it was well advertised. So that was a little different. It was a small venue that was packed.
Yep.
But to say that this was unique is to drastically undersell the experience of being on stage. I haven't been physically there to coach at the Arnold, but I've heard it's similar. Yep. Also, Mega Nationals for the USAPL, which was formerly an IPF meet, or an IPF regional meet that qualified you for Worlds for the American athletes. I've heard that's also very similar. But this was not at your typical powerlifting venue. So this was at like a concert hall. Mm-hmm. 3 tiers, mezzanine, the backstage area, which we'll talk about in a bit. I just want to kind of give the audience experience. When I went out into the coaching box, when Jess did her opening squat, I looked to my right, and I immediately had part of my brain compartmentalize. You need to not look at that and not think about that, because that looks like 2,000 people in that you're on stage for a rap or a rock concert. And it was intimidating. And I didn't think I would be intimidated, not because like I'm some rock star or anything, but because I've spoken at so many live events and I've coached at live events. But the difference between 300 people in an audience and 2,000, we could do the math, but it feels very different visually. When we were backstage, just to give you a little brief understanding of it, we had monitors that showed the lifter on the platform. And we were thinking that the monitor volume was turned down really low because we could hear things, right? Like you hear the crowd roaring and stuff like that. And one of the coaches was trying to like turn the volume down or up, or I'm not sure what they were doing, but they realized there was no volume. And we, a flight down the stairs in between like 3 walls and maybe 30 meters, 40 meters away from the crowd actually was, through brick walls, could hear the roar of the crowd backstage. So that was a moment we were all kind of like, whoa. And then when Evie Corrigan ended up winning the whole event, she was the first squat to go out, which is kind of cool. You know, she was the opening squat, which typically is the quote unquote weakest lifter, ended up winning the whole event. She came down the steps having been off the platform. And if you watch the event, you see that Evie is fully there experiencing it. She doesn't display nervousness, which I'm sure she did have in the same way that other lifters do, but she was enjoying it. And she came down the steps and she was like, oh my God, wow, that was crazy. And all of us are just like, you know? So when I went out there and I looked, I was like, oh my God, I have never seen a powerlifting crowd like this. Maybe other people have experienced that on the higher level competitions on the untested side, or say for the Arnold. But it was, I've never been a part of anything like it. And if people think it's like Worlds, it's absolutely not. Worlds is an oddly like low spectator, high pressure event that has a very unique feel to it.
Now, Conor, so actually what we'll talk about, Eric, before we talk about the coaching experience backstage, which no one really, unless the footage eventually gets released, had access to. It wasn't part of the live stream as far as I'm aware, right? The warm room, anything. And so that's yet to be potentially released. I do want to talk about the audience experience because, you know, we're very highbrow people here, Conor and myself. We like things like wrestling matches, hair metal. And so the litmus test for what we think is a quality event, it's up here.
Classy.
Yeah.
Classy
gents. And so you talking about that, and that's very interesting. I just wrote down at the end, we want to talk about favorite moments, because certainly one of them for myself upon the replay when I saw, I didn't get to see it in person, talk about Evie going out, was the 93 kg showdown. And this is skipping ahead, but I have to give a shout out to that because that is what people need to see. And that's, as far as I'm aware, Jay told me this, and I'm not surprised that I think it accumulated 800,000 views on the old TikTok, the Keiko.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But you could tell that moment would, and that's what I'm saying. This is skipping ahead, but I do want to recognize that the potential for dramatic stories and narratives that can then engage the audience was 1,000% there. 93 kg showdown where Gavin Aiden, he makes his final attempt, therefore putting him in second place. Pans him, falling behind him, he moves out of the frame, and Keiko is just there. I've never seen someone look that dedicated on camera. Perfect transition. He goes out, he wins it. That is powerlifting in a nutshell. But we, on the other hand, we had boots on the ground. We were right there near the front. Like we were like 2 rows back from the front, right?
Well, I started in the very...
And then we got you.
I started in the cheap seats just for full transparency. Yeah. And then I made my way down. So
yeah. So you've attended, and correct me if I'm wrong, did you attend World's Strongest Man?
Yep. And I've done Ireland's Strongest Man, Britain's Strongest Man.
Yeah.
And a lot of wrestling shows.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. So I do want you to describe what the scene was like there, because I will say I've been at probably only 30 to 40 powerlifting meets of varying scales. I was at the 2018 Arnold, and I would say the environment of the overall audience where they were aware enough of what was going on. Yep. But there's still a little bit an element of them not quite following. It would be like an Arnold event, just in the sense that they know powerlifting and they know like someone's lifting weight. They might not know, if this person hits the weight, right, it'd be there. But in terms of the general energy and the people that therefore fed off of it, the athletes that really enjoyed it, it was most akin to me, the 2018 Arnold from what I've seen. Can you talk to me, Conor, about yourself, what you observed from attending some of these events?
So I think strongman and strongwoman events have the most unique audience across all of the strength sports. Maybe CrossFit and the CrossFit Games has it, where you get like the lucky loos. Like there's a strongman thing. I remember seeing that at Christmas. I'm going to go. So you get people with very little knowledge going to a strongman show or a strongwoman show, and then the events themselves lend themselves to, even if you don't understand this, you know this is heavy because a male or female athlete is pulling a truck.
Yep.
Or they're pushing a very heavy log overhead. So you can, I'll put it this way, I can catch friends to go to a strongman or strongwoman show that I don't think powerlifting will ever have, because it's more technical. Now that caveat aside, in terms of the audience themselves, very high knowledge. Like even in the cheap seats, myself and others were talking about the various lifters and the various divisions in a way that like that uber knowledge was there.
Yep.
I think people knew the narrative going in for most of the lifters.
Yep.
The actual, it's funny, so to just briefly go aside, on the scholarship on professional wrestling, because there is scholarship on professional wrestling, often talks about the symbiotic relationship between audience and participant.
Yep.
And for a lot of the lifters, and it'd be interesting to get your perspective on it, you could see that there was that mutual sort of relationship where the crowd was really getting behind the lifters. The lifters seemed to get that extra buzz from it. Some of them were playing up to the audience. Like Joy was in her absolute element, playing up to the audience, which is such an incredible thing to see.
Yes.
And I think that was the closest I've seen a powerlifting show or meet to a commercial strength show. Like I know this is still a competition, but to your point, Eric, it's different because it was drawing people in much greater numbers. So it was more akin to an Olympia, an Arnold, a World's Strongest Man, World's Strongest Woman show. So I think it was the closest I've seen in terms of atmosphere and hype, especially once we got to world records, once we got to Jesus, once we got to the final stages, where it was someone going to pip into second or pip into first, there was a real oomph to it. And I think the MC did a good job of like building that hype. So for me, it's the closest I've seen a powerlifting meet to like a popular recreational, it's Saturday, let's go to the strongman show, even if you don't get it, sort of vibe.
Yeah. Now, Eric, I'm going to ask you these questions. I will say, from my perspective, what I saw, similar to you, Conor, was the kernel of an idea of something that could be great. And what I mean when I say that, it is I would say the start of people being able to attend or watch something like powerlifting and deriving enjoyment that they probably I would say previously would not. Now, I won't spoil it past that. I do want to give a shout out to the winners, Evie Corrigan and Jesus Oliveras, because I will say it was by far one of the best meets I've ever attended. I thought it was simply sensational, and I would say the overall audience experience from talking to a few people is that they thought it was either the best powerlifting meet they had been to, or certainly one of the best, and the experience overall was incredibly favorable. I think that is the general consensus by far, and I do want to express just gratitude at the fact that we can witness such an event like this. The powerlifting has come to this point. I remember over a decade ago when tested powerlifting was far more popular, or raw powerlifting was not as popular as geared lifting, multiply or single ply lifting. That we've gotten to this point over the last decade that you can put on an event like that. So huge kudos to SBD for putting on the event and this Sheffield showdown. Eric, talk to us though, because this is the untold story. We're going to get back into all the different things like the viewership, the audience, the athletes, what's next, all those sorts of things. But I think one of the most interesting conversations is what happened in the back room, because people did not get to see what the athletes were doing, how they were reacting to the situation. When you have 2,000 people, as you said, Eric, 300, that's a different experience. 2,000, it's an experience none of them have been in before. So both as a coach, Jess being kind of that avatar of maybe the athlete experience and everything that you saw back there, can you tell the audience the untold story of what transpired at Sheffield? Eric's like, I got deets. He said, I got gossip.
The skeletons coming out there.
No, I mean, you guys joke, but I think in most powerlifting meets, there is a very predictable backstage, if you will, or back platform environment that most powerlifting fans would be pretty clear on what's happening, because if you're just seated towards kind of the back rows, you can see behind typically the canvas partition that they put up with the IPF logo or the regional logo or whatever, and coming out from one side is the coach and the athlete, and you can see some fold-up chairs that are along the side of a wall, and you've got your 3 lifters out that are sitting there, and the only things that they try to actively hide, if you actually read the IPF world, the rules, is they discourage lifters from doing nose torque on camera. They think it looks a little...
Not a great look.
Yeah, there you go. The ammonia. So you're supposed to do that backstage. They're also putting baby powder on. They've got an area away from the platform, so you don't see that. That's more logistical, because you don't want people confusing chalk with baby powder getting on the platform, people slipping. It's a safety issue, right? And it's exactly what you'd expect behind that curtain. It's a bunch of combo racks and people warming up. And it would be entirely unsurprising.
Mm-hmm.
This was absolutely not that. I have coached, like I said, in multiple lifting environments, and the distinctions between them in comparison to the Sheffield, now they feel almost all homogenous. Sometimes there's not enough plates. Sometimes you have to warm up in a less than ideal environment. Sometimes it's a little cramped. Sometimes it's great. But this was nothing like I've ever been at. And while I think the audience experience was potentially the best it's ever been for at least a drug-tested powerlifting meet, I'm going to be candid. It was a challenge, and it was a stressor to be in the environment we were in.
Do you think that athletes also felt the same?
Yes.
Okay.
I tried to shield Jess from that as much as possible, but there was active conflict, which I'll get into, about the backstage environment, which is pretty funny. So this is a multi-story building we're in. Like I said, there was a mezzanine, there was 2 basement levels. There are probably 4 or 5 different elevators that can take you up and throughout the floors in this building. They're all labeled differently too. So depending on the elevator you're in, the level of the floor where the actual competition is could be 0 or 1. And there was 2 different elevators that we were taking to get up to the platform. So yeah, you're probably realizing, oh, hold on, rewind. You're taking an elevator up to get to the platform. Yes, because this is not a sports complex. This is absolutely a building that was designed to support shows. So we were actually on the 2 side rooms of a banquet hall downstairs. So the room for anyone who went to the meet and greet afterwards was between the men's and the women's warm-up room areas. Now, it's only 24 athletes, and there are numerous head-to-heads, and everyone's technically competing against each other. So these 2 warm-up rooms had 4 platforms apiece, and you had 3 lifters warming up together on each platform. And the thing they tried to do is they get the similar strength levels together without it having to be the same weight class. So obviously, if you got the exact same strength levels together, it would have been Jess, Akagha, and Carlina warming up on the same platform. These 3 are some of the most collegial lifters of the bunch, but that wouldn't have gone well. I can tell you that. You know, it would at least been something they had to manage. So that wasn't the case. I was actually warming up on the same platform with Amanda Lawrence and Bonica Brown. So very close in strength to Jess, but not the 76s. And so that was going on 4 different platforms on the women's side and the men's side, with the banquet hall between them.
Yep.
And from the women's side, we would walk through the banquet hall, walk through the men's side, walk down a hall, push the button for the elevator, and potentially have an SBD backstage handler say, hey, wait, there's more lifters coming, while we're waiting to go up. Now, for those who know, once you're done with all your warm-ups and once you're up, then you stay there. But for the very first attempt, it was hectic. Because there is a specific rule that 3 minutes before the first lift, you can change your opener. So a common thing a coach does, and a very important part of your skill, is gauging the speed of your athlete's last and second to last warm-ups to determine, do we think they're as strong as they need to be? If it's the squat opener, how much did the weight cut affect their strength? And if they're a little slow, that's fine, because we just need more time to rehydrate. We can cut the weight. We drop 5 kilos off the opening squat and then just take a bigger jump, 2.5 on the second, to get closer to where we wanted to get to on our third, hoping that we're getting rehydrated. And that decision required a very unique setup. So there was an SBD kind of comp marshal wearing a unique shirt, a red shirt, everyone else wearing black. And he was calling out, hey, we have X number of minutes before you change your attempt. Instead of having to run out to an elevator, go up, and then change your attempt, you talk to him. And I timed it. There was 3 ways for us to get up from the warm-up room to the top area. One was to take the stairs. It was actually 3 flights of stairs, and it took just about 2 minutes. One was one elevator, which took about 3 minutes, and the other one was another elevator, which took slightly longer than 2 minutes. As we were trying these out, Jess was, I think, just focused. She's a hardcore competitor. She's not your typical powerlifter who just does lifting. You know, she goes on jogs regularly every night. She does a high volume of training. She goes on walks with her dog all the time. She is someone with diabetes, so she does a lot to regulate her blood glucose, but that's also just her personality. She's an active person. She's an athlete beyond just her powerlifting skills. So she's like, you know what, I'll just go up the 3 flights of stairs. And I was like, Jess, and I'm an athlete-centered coach, but I was like, Jess, I really don't think we should go 3 flights of stairs before you take squat and deadlift attempts. And she was like, I'm fine, it's 3 flights of stairs. And I was like, let me just time how long it takes to go up. So I actually clocked the timer, and I walked and took the 2 elevators and actually figured that out. And I was like, listen, the stairs are only going to give us a 30-second advantage, so why don't we just take the elevator? And there was a moment where Jess gave me a look like, okay, mother hen, I can fucking take 3 flights of stairs. So I was like trying not to push, but ultimately I was pretty adamant that we weren't going to take the stairs.
Jeff's tough, man. You got to give that massive respect.
Stairs are broken. I mean, out of order.
You know, like grabbed the 25-pound plate and like damaged the stairs. Like, look what happened.
Oh my God.
Whoever had a plate, you know. So anyway, I love you, Jess. That was the closest we've ever had of a conflict of related to how do we get to the platform. It was funny in retrospect. But anyway, so we had to figure out which pathway we'd take to get to the platform, because in Jess's case, I don't think it mattered as much. You know, even though, so for example, her weakest lift relative to the field is the bench press, but she was still about fifth because she's a 76 kilo. So there's 69s, there's 63s, there's 57s, 52s, and there's a 47. So even her weakest lift is going to be somewhere middle of the pack. So we don't need to worry about it taking 3 minutes to get up, right? But I do wonder if we sat down with, you know, the 52s and the 47 and the 57s, was there that time pressure potentially? Same question for the men's lifters who were in the lighter weight classes. So it wasn't too stressful, that part. It did get a little interesting when we were considering a potential attempt change on the deadlift. As everyone knows, we were in a battle with Carlina. That was not that Akagha wasn't battling with us, but her total was battling with us. But she was going for a bench record. You know, she's the strongest bencher, like by body weight in the whole competition. So we were looking at, we don't have the lot number advantage. Listen to the Matt Gary episode if you don't know what that means. So if we want to pull last or after Carlina, we have to put a heavier weight on the bar. So she had an opener of 240 listed. We had an opener of 242. And Carlina's coach, he was doing a lot of hovering around the attempt change guy. So if he went to 242 and we had the same number, she would pull second. And then I wouldn't be able to gauge off of Carlina. Are they going to go for a world record? She's close enough. You know, are we in a position, we weren't actually, where the final deadlift will determine who is ahead in the 76s and potentially getting up to 1,000, pounds more. So I was hovering around and waiting for the very last second for this marshal who was calling it in on a walkie-talkie and taking a picture of the attempt change card and sending it up so they could change the attempt. So SBD managed the situation, but it was a situation that needed to be managed. We couldn't easily walk out and watch the attempts on the platform while we were warming up. We had to watch it on a monitor, and they had a scorecard. The score system up. Once we went up, there was another monitoring system and another scorecard. But once you went up, it was a much more cramped environment. Like the warm-up areas, like I said, it's a banquet hall. Tons of room. A little weird being on like nice wooden floor and setting up the platform.
It's classy.
It was classy. I was a little worried about how, Jesus Olivares' last deadlift or Emil Norling's last deadlift warm-up went. But hey, SBD, they're dealing with that. That's not my responsibility. Hopefully the wooden floors are perfectly fine. I'm sure they are. I am not making any statements regarding the damage that I did or did not see in the warm-up room.
You heard it here first, Eric, right?
You heard it first. The warm-up room is destroyed. The Sheffield is now canceled forever. No, I did actually wonder about it because it's just such an abnormal environment for warm-up rooms. So anyway, the upstage area is basically a hallway and then a very narrow stairwell up to the side stage. And there was only about 10 feet before you got to the curtain of where you'd actually be out on there. So it was almost impossible to see the lifting with your own eyes unless you were one out.
Yep.
And that's not typically the case in powerlifting meets. And I was actually really concerned about that because the jury is behind a curtain 10 feet in front of me where I'm not kind of allowed to be because there's not enough space on the other side of the platform. And the jury is required to be there at all international meets where you can set records and you can potentially challenge any lift that has either one red or one white. So if I have a lifter who misses a lift and gets one white and two reds, I can go to that table and fight for my lifter and say, no, I do think they hit depth, or I do think that was not up-down movement, they just paused. Can you please review it? But I have to be able to physically see that. Not a big deal when it's your own lifter because you're actually out there in the coach's box, you're on the stage. But when you're in a position where you're fighting for world records, and those world records are worth 5,000 pounds. So for example, Carlina did exactly what I expected. She's got a really strong squat. She broke the world record on her second attempt.
Yep.
And in that case, then Jess could have, if we thought she had it, I don't think she had, gone out and chipped it for 0.5. And then Carlina, as exactly like I expected, tried to take as much as she could on her third squat. And in fact, she did get one white and two reds. If it had just been one different and Jess had been stronger and had gotten 224, I guarantee you I would have ran out there and pleaded to actually challenge the case against Carlina. But that's hard to do if I can't physically see it. Because I need to know, okay, was that up, down? Did she not hit depth? It needs to be a legitimate challenge.
So on that, did you think there was a pressure? Because obviously for the coaches, because I did notice you'd see people sometimes hovering, because to go to the judges, you needed to go across the stage and then chat to the judges. And oftentimes the turnaround was so quick that you were like, will I, won't I? And then the other lifter is out on the platform. So you only had, like, there was sort of like a pressure to going to the judges. And even when you saw some coaches go to the judges,
My boy Ben,
you also had the audience
like boo.
boo, like legit.
Because they didn't
boo.
understand what was going on. Like they
Yeah.
thought, not that it was foul play, but like that they
Almost like it was, even though it
shouldn't
wasn't,
be
but
doing it.
yeah.
Even though that's very much part of the game.
No, and I can understand. And there was even a time where I think Gavin Aiden at Nationals had one of his squats challenged and overturned, and he was like, "That's a bitch move."
Yeah.
And I completely understand that response in the moment. You got your squat, it's a PB, it moved you up a placing, and then it feels like it's taken away from you.
Yeah.
But honestly, this is the rules of the sport and the way it operates at a high level. And I think the best way to view yourself as a coach is that you're like the advocate, you're like the defense attorney for your athlete. And in a meet like this, where it's literally dictated by who beats the higher percentage of the record, it's not just within the weight class. Yes, Jess was competing against Carlina and Akagha, but really, she was competing against 11 other women. And each time someone moves up a place, if it's above her, she moves down a place. So I think everyone should have expected, and I think any coach who was actually doing right by their lifter was going to be there to challenge in any opportunity they could, so long as it was legitimate. And for it to be legitimate, I have to have my eyes on the person, not just on the monitor, because the monitor's from the front. Like, here's an example. People in the audience didn't understand why Jess got such a long pause before her squat command, because from the front, you couldn't actually see that her knees were a little soft. I saw it, and I understood why she didn't get the squat command. This is the first time in a competition she's walked out 220. That's a heavy-ass weight. So I was yelling at her, lock out, extend, but it was so loud in the audience, especially once the pause is going on, like, come on, let her go, that I had to yell at her, and then she heard it, and she locked her knees, and she got the squat command. So that's the type of thing you can't see on a monitor. So if someone is not fully locked down on a deadlift, you need a side angle. Honestly, to gauge depth really effectively, it's helpful to have a side angle. So the necessity to be able to see the lifter who you're in direct competition with and who you might challenge, absolutely. And yeah, I think we did feel pressure. And it was something that was unspoken between the coaches. There was a little bit of it discussed in the coaches meeting, and people asked about the logistics, like, okay, what's the equivalent of 75 euro? Oh, that's 60 pound. Okay, where will the jury be? Okay, do we need a written? Okay, we need a written challenge if we're going to do that. So because everyone was asking questions and it was discussed, I think all the coaches understood that that was fair game. It was going to happen. It did happen, as everyone saw. But it wasn't like the coaches sat down and went, right, so when we challenge, there's going to be later in the meet, there's going to be maybe 5 of us. I think that's going to happen because it does feel a little taboo or potentially viewed as unsportsmanlike, even though I think people need to understand that now that powerlifting is at this level, it's not just a bunch of people hitting PRs and seeing who's the strongest. It is actually a legitimate competition, and the gamesmanship that comes in is going to use all of the most obscure aspects of the rules. And I would encourage people to consider that if something is codified into the rules and allowed, and it's seen as the coach is there to advocate and be almost like the defense attorney for the lifter, that is not something that is inappropriate to do. And in fact, I would see it as a failure by a coach if they did not go out and challenge their lifter when they're battling another lifter for a world record. And we want our world records to beat a standard. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is if someone does not do a squat, it should not be considered a squat. And it is a subjective sport. And if I, as a coach, of course, biased, and being an advocate for my lifter, does not think someone hit depth, but 2 people on the jury did, but 1 did not, I'm going to go, or rather than the 3 judges, I'm going to go to the jury to see whether they agree or not. And if I wouldn't do that, it wouldn't be at, say, a regional comp. It might not be at a national comp, but it's something like the Sheffield. You bet your ass I'm going to do it, and the crowd can boo me all they want.
It's funny though, I just wonder if, I genuinely think if the judges' table was closer to
Yes.
that, just peek out the curtain, Can we? Because the booing,
The optics of it, of a guy, of a other coach
literally running across.
because you have to run, you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
It just looked bad. It lent itself to the audience wanting to boo.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I'm not claiming that was done intentionally.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But
Let me speculate for a moment. If you read the specific rules in the IPF rulebook, the IPF technical rulebook, it says the judges may require a written request for challenges. I was speaking to Matt Gary, who we've had on. He's probably the currently the longest active coach I'm aware of, who's coached at the most world championships. I asked him, hey man, in any of your international comps, have they ever required a written thing? He's like, no, it's extremely rare. It's very, very rare. They typically don't. They can. It says may. So I think the fact that the jury was on the other side of the stage and that we actually had to have written requests, I think there was some anticipation of the fact that this is a zero-sum game. It's basically like having a dogfight among 12 people. It would be like having 12 equally matched people in the same weight class, if you want to think of the equivalent. And they didn't want the Sheffield to become the challenge fest.
just tit for tat.
I don't know for sure. And it could have just been that's the best place to put it. And we had the right combination of IPF officials. They wanted this to be legit for the first year. But I would say that still within the rights and rules and the way you can set things up, it was actively discouraging, or at least it was putting additional barriers so there were fewer challenges. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I can understand it from an optics perspective. It could have just been the choices that were made, but the result was that it was much harder as a coach to be like, I'm going to pull the trigger.
Eric, any other thoughts before we talk kind of about the audience experience, the marketing behind it, and then what people were saying online? And just because I think we can all agree, Sheffield was seen, or perhaps will be seen, as the standard with which all other big, certainly meets that have monetary compensation. I keep bringing that up because there's a reason behind that. Is there anything else you want to say about the behind the scenes experience that maybe they didn't get to see?
I do.
Eric's like, that's part 1 of 12.
Yeah. So this is going to be another maybe 30, no longer than 45-minute discussion.
Even now.
Well, not a discussion. I'll be going, and then you guys can wait. No, this is a brief comment, but I think it's worthwhile. Each athlete was allowed one coach. And typically what happens at world level meets is that you'll have a national team and you'll have national coaches. You'll have a head coach and you'll have a number of assistant coaches. And you'll also have personal coaches who get permission to act as basically assistant coaches. So it's not uncommon at all to have maybe 3 coaches who are all helping spot, load, and do the calls. Now, they manage some of that with only allowing one coach in the backstage area by having SBD staff, which was awesome. Load everything. So I would just tell a couple people, hey, I want 170. We're going to take it in 2 minutes. And they're like, okay, Amanda's going to take 180 in 1 minute. So we'll load that first and we'll unload. And I go, thank you so much. That's great. And they were fantastic, truly amazing. And I appreciate all the help SBD had. But those people aren't going to sit there and think, hey, man, what do you think we should do for our second and third? It wouldn't be appropriate. And they also stayed in the warm-up room. So when it came down to gauging what the person has left, running the math, having a minute to change an attempt, being in a cramped environment, being unable to see the lift, it was the most high-pressure coaching environment I've had. Because sometimes what you'll have is one coach who films the lift, one coach who's watching the lift, and one coach who's getting the athlete ready. And some of the coaching teams that were out there managed that. So, for example, Jason Tremblay was in the front row of the audience with an earpiece connected to Ben Esgro, and he had Matt Gary sitting next to him, and he had a spreadsheet open. So they had a whole system going so that Ben had all the information he needed right there. We weren't quite as high-tech as that, but I had Garrett Bentley. Shout out to Garrett. He's one of the national coaches for Team Canada. Jess is a Canadian athlete. I was technically, as I intimated in a prior episode, I'm the head coach for Team Canada at Sheffield. So I had Garrett Bentley on WhatsApp in my pocket, and he was watching on the live stream. There's a slight delay, and it does make a difference for the 1 minute you have to for the attempt change. And each time that Jess did something, he would just send me an immediate text of what he thought she had left. And then we had basically, the good news is Jess is a very collected, calm, focused athlete. She is able to be in the moment and give you her impression and say what she thinks she has left. And when she doesn't, she goes, I trust you guys. And when you can see a certain level of fire and buildup in her, you take that into account. But of course, her input is incredibly valuable. So as an example, on her third bench press, The question was, what do we go up 2.5 or 5? And it's hard to gauge. Her bench press is just out of that range where like 2.5 is almost always the call you make. You know, if you're benching 80 or less, it's pretty much just 2.5, 2.5. In worst case, they miss and you lose 2.5. Right around 100, 105, 110, where Jess is, there's a question as to whether we're going to go 5, 2.5, or we could go 5, 5. And I was confident in a 5 change. Jess was like, you know, whatever you think. And I wanted to have Garrett's input. And there was a little bit of a delay. And, you know, the connection back there, we weren't allowed to use the Wi-Fi because they wanted to preserve the stream, which, I mean, I didn't like that as a coach, but I understand from the importance of the event overall. And this is the first year, so it's not a knock. It's just the way it was. So I'm operating off of, you know, 3G, 4G in a building with multiple floors. And, you know, the referee is sitting there going, you got 15 seconds to change your attempt. And I calmly said, yep, just give me 10 seconds. And then I'm waiting on Garrett, and I write 1, 0. And then he said, oh, yep, 5 as well. And I went, it's 7.5, and I gave it to her with maybe 4 or 5 seconds left. So that's the kind of environment we were in. That's something that could have been much faster. It could have been me looking over 20 feet to another person who videotaped it while I watched it, and I go, 5, and they nod at me. And it could have happened within 15 seconds rather than needing a full 55 seconds. So that was a challenging environment to be the only physical coach there. And even for the people who did have multiple coaches, it was very difficult to have more than one eye on the lift. So as an example, Joey Flex brought a fair number of lifters to the event, I think 5. So he was able to kind of, you know, move them around. So like 5 athletes had one coach, but they're all part of the same team. Mm-hmm. I wasn't in that situation, you know, and doesn't mean I won't be in the future. Like, for example, if I had Bryce could have brought somebody, and then we would be able to help one another. And I think that's an interesting situation where it provided larger teams a competitive advantage, which doesn't normally really happen on an individual level, but it was just very restrictive to what we could see. So, yeah.
We did talk to Eric about 2 men in a trench coat, didn't we?
The general concept, we did float by him and he said no.
Just didn't want to have someone on his shoulders for all day.
I just didn't know enough extremely short coaches who were good.
Or extremely long trench coats.
It's true. I like Susie Harwood Gary is one, and if we can find another person who's quite short, then we've got 3 coaches and 1 trench coat.
Who does the arms?
It's probably someone with long. We need a short deadlifter.
Yeah.
There it is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Eric, that was very insightful, and I think for the viewer, for the listener right now, they had no idea about any of that. I do want to talk about the historical significance and some of the things that we observed when we both viewed the event and then when we thought about it, because I think a key point that you mentioned right there is the fact that when people would challenge, they didn't understand what was going on in the audience. They thought it was generally a bad thing. They didn't understand the rules. And I would say the summation for me with Sheffield is that the audience thoroughly enjoyed it, but they didn't get it. And that is a key, that's the crux right there. And that is a failure in terms of the way that it was presented in order to make it digestible and understandable. Like we bring up the concept in wrestling, we were joking, but about narratives, about being personally attached. And that is what keeps people emotionally invested in something, and why the key concept, and I will go, this is now my turn, Conor, before I kick it over to you to all my 10-minute soliloquy about these things, because it's important. We're all extremely passionate about this, about powerlifting, about lifting in general. I've been covering powerlifting now for probably the last decade. I remember when I first started showing Jeremy Hamilton on my YouTube channel, people would say, who's that guy? What the hell is he doing? They weren't interested, and I don't mean that offensively, but it just wasn't at the point. So you needed these people, you needed people that were kind of iconoclast to the space to say, like, I like lifting heavy, I want to cover it, and then it becomes a thing. And from being to that point to now, I think the Sheffield is a beneficiary of the work that so many people, coaches, athletes, that have put in across years and years and years. And so I saw the potential for that culmination to be something that was historically significant, that it was, but I'll frame it another way. Evie Corrigan, shout out to you. You had a sensational performance. That's a story right there. The dark horse that no one expected to win took the whole damn thing. No one understands that. And from the audience perspective, and that's one thread, but that's a key thread, right? Because you want the champions to be understood. You want the storylines to be understood. Any sporting event, it doesn't matter what it is. And so there's a few different reasons for that. And that's why we brought it before Jonathan Keiko, his video, the video that now has almost 1 million views, it's currently even more, I think, now Jesus, his all-time world record, historically incredibly significant. But that little snapshot has more views because it shows someone in the heat of battle, in the moment, them understanding something's about to go down, what he needed to do to pull within himself and then become victorious. All of that, and now I'll say this, Eric, to be clear, there were some technical issues with the stream, and that is something that can be fixed. My number one recommendation, and the small bit, and this is the humble brag of with a History Channel, is that you need a professional producer. You need this. This should not happen because 3 years is more than enough time, right? With a company, not with SBD. This isn't a criticism. I would say, these things will happen, but it's a chaotic environment. As you said, the venue choice was a very interesting choice, the way I'd phrase, because you could see immediately when we walked in, the athletes were joking about it because they didn't understand. 2-3 flights of stairs downstairs for the war room, that's going to be a problem. You're having big man, my man, Jesus, potentially, let's say if the elevators are full, let's say if the lifts don't work, like all these things. For his after he does it, his third lift, he's going now for the deadlift. So he's done his warm up. He's about to do his first lift in the deadlift, and his ass has to walk up 3 flights of stairs. You don't think that's going to affect performance a little bit? So, anyways, all that to say that planning and preparation is very important. I think they did probably the best that they could given the circumstances, but because it was so historically significant, to me, a lot was riding on it, and that's why I think. One of the things, and we'll talk, I'll just go off of this for a bit, is the stream number that I took a look at and the overall kind of social media buzz around it was not equivalent, was not representative of how actually important this event was and could have been. And I bring up the audience experience because that is the key. The audience must understand it. The people directly behind us when you came out at the end, they, and I was listening the whole time, I was with my man Jay right here, they were powerlifters. They knew broadly the numbers that people were lifting and what their records were. So they, myself, I would say were relatively in the same ballpark. But I knew that the percentages, the formulas, and they were confused at every step of the way in terms of who was in what place. And even the loading screen that we saw, Conor, right? Do you want to just talk about that for a minute before I go on?
Is this the leaderboard?
The leaderboard.
So the leaderboard would go up and Jane Doe 102%. So Janice Doe 101%. You're like, oh my God, it's neck and neck. And then just that slight delay, and then Jane Doe would suddenly go up to 103.5%. So suddenly the margin between the lifters gets larger. So I think there was some lags in updating the scoreboard. And it's similar with the men's.
Yes.
At one point, I think Tyler Atwood either shot up or he went, I can't remember on the leaderboard. But
we were confused.
We were confused because he kept changing because of that sort of lag in updating it.
And to that point, Conor, what's so interesting about this is that you always have the audience is the key. It's everything, because if they can get it, they get emotionally attached to it. And that's where I think a lot of sports do a sensational job. The announcer did an excellent job, did the best that he could given the circumstances, but because he doesn't have a live feed, Eric, he didn't say it as an example, oh, Evie, so Evie, because she's lighter, right, she's going to come out first. But she's currently the leader, and if she secures this, then Nomi, who was second, right, she would have to hit X amount. No one got any of that. So the whole event is taking place, and it was framed, and I think it's very interesting to frame it as champion against champion, because that's a cool way of making it that every single lift matters. And that kernel, I think, is a great idea. But the way that it played out, live stream after speaking to some people, guys like King of Lifts, like Ryan Lapidat, he did a very good job of framing it. So it was his job. But the way that it was presented still left some confusion. And that is why, out of Sheffield, should it not be the winners that get the most amount of clout or the most amount of notoriety? Evie winning Sheffield, in terms of what was shared and what was spoken about, because people didn't understand it, is like here, Jesus breaking an all-time record that I think historically it's incredibly significant. It is perhaps the key headline, in my opinion, from Sheffield. Got some attention, but then it's like, 39 world records were broken, and they might show as an example, experts like Keiko, with a bench, amazing, but he broke it, and that is a truly excellent performance. But I think everything wasn't given the right context, and I bring this up because I think a few things that were interesting to me is that the role of different people, the role of independent media, of which we're a part of, is to help frame what's going on in order to have the audience understand it. And I think from my personal perspective, and this is what's great, is that SBD, they were generous in the sense that we were allowed, there was a room to interview athletes, but full disclosure, I paid for my own flight. There's nothing, I didn't require or request accommodations or anything like that, but it's something that we had to approach SBD about the general concept, and Eric was great to be kind of the intermediary there to communicate with them what our needs would be, and they try to accommodate us in certain ways, but I don't think they got why it was so important. And that is why, as an example, a quick one, I bring up 2014, and it's important because I've been thinking about this, that Jeremy shared his powerlifting knowledge, which was incredibly novel at the time, and new people weren't seeing a top-level competitor. He went from being an unknown lifter to when people, and jokingly people call him the couch, because it's just the way that when he said coach, like, people with the Canadian accent, he went to Boss of Bosses 2, and people were rooting for him. This person that no one knew, and they were emotionally invested in this story, and that is because his story, what he was doing, was portrayed authentically. It was given the right context, and I keep bringing that up. And I will say that there are other people, as far as I'm aware of, and I won't name names then, but maybe an athlete in particular that is working with a certain hunk that I know that wanted to try and film some of the things behind the scenes, and this would only increase the exposure. It would only be good for the sport, for the greater sport, for Sheffield, for SBD as a company in particular. And it felt hard to communicate with it. I think they didn't understand that because they probably haven't been in this position before. They haven't participated at such a large scale. They don't know what, having a stream with 18,000 viewers, which is what they had, is good. But for the success of things like Sheffield, it could and should ultimately be better, because you want to have that feedback loop where any company that endeavors to put on something of this size and scale, not that they get an immediate monetary return, but they're like, we should do this again, rather than, oh my God, this was disastrous for us to try and put this on. So I bring this up that I think with independent media or other outlets, it could have been helpful to have greater access. We wanted, and I advocated for, but we weren't able to get it, access to the back room in order to film. And I'll give you an example. They have the lift. Eric described the lift in the basement. And immediately, for a very cinematic experience, when you have a lifter, so Eric, looking great, on point, shirt tight, not because it's a small shirt, because my man's that large. Jess is there, looking focused. You get a camera in there, you ask them beforehand, you sign them like, hey, guys, whatever, Taylor, do you want? Taylor would say, yeah, right? Jess, are you cool with someone coming in? And they'd be back there, or even if it's too tight, you get just a camera perched there, right? So just one that's placed there. Cool. And that is the one when they're coming up. Just think about this, Eric. So it's this is a head-to-head. The announcer, they have no context once again about who's really in what place and what they need to do. So if the announcer really doesn't know, the audience surely doesn't know. No one's understanding the significance of anything. But anyways, this is one example, right? That we try to pitch that I was trying to talk to them about. So lift comes up on a side screen or picture-in-picture, which is easily possible. This is 2023. You have the lifter coming up. So it's okay, deadlifts are here. And the top battle now, the thing you guys are going to want to watch out for is going to be Kaiko against Gavin Aiden, right? They're vying for potentially second and third, or maybe even first if something happens to Jesus. And then they show the lift with it, boom, and they're coming up, right? So just as an example, a small one, but I think they absolutely could have done a better job of portraying the event that was in and of itself innately historic because of the way that was set up. And that's why I was going to bring up that I think it also would have been possible, and Eric can correct me in terms of the warm rooms and so on and so forth. But I remember, and that's why it takes all these people. And one of the things I was reminiscing on, and I'll wrap this up in about 2 to 3 minutes because I want to kick it over to my man Conor, is that it was so many people that were personally invested in powerlifting that made this moment happen over years and years, right, Eric? Where we would go to Boss of Bosses. I went down in 2015. And Dan Green is the person that put that on, right? He was the person slated to break the record because at that time he was on a tear. He was the man to beat. Everyone thought he was going to be the person to win. Jeremy knew him. He was an acquaintance. He reached out to them. He's organized. So Dan is organizing the event. He's participating in the event. It's a lot. It's chaotic. For him, it's absolutely, for him and his wife, it's absolutely chaotic. And there's, several hundred people. It was probably 400 or 500 people. Andre Milanovic was there. I reached out and said, hey, I want to try and film this, so on and so forth. And they allowed me access to everything. And that's different because for Dan Green, his competitor is Jeremy Hamilton, the person I'm filming. Dan Green let me film him, camera in the face, right next to Jeremy, right before his attempts. He gave me full access. Now you think if you're the world record holder, think about that, Eric. You just said about Carlina and Jess, if they share the platform, how that, maybe even though they're very cordial with one another, that could have been a problem. He understood that like this would be beneficial to myself or to lifting in general. It's not like, hey, Omar makes this video and immediately Boss of Bosses 3 goes up like 200% in terms of sales. But it's like, yeah. I mean, maybe, but it's like, so they let me in the warm-up room. I heard and like just private conversations and things that I did not share, but I got full access. And that is an event that for Dan, controlling what the narrative was or controlling who would film would be in his best interest. It wasn't directly in his best interest for me to be there, but he allowed me to, and that was huge. And that's why I always big up like Boss of Bosses 2, that experience. I got to film afterwards behind the scenes. I met Ed Cohen, Andrei Milanichev. And this is the part where I try not to be arrogant and say this. I'm speaking from my perspective, but I know there's someone else that had someone that could have been filming there that would have massively benefited SBD and Sheffield and not themselves personally. And what I mean when I say that, me covering the Sheffield for my channel, it'd do okay. It wouldn't matter for my career, for anything, the great career. When I say it wouldn't matter, it's not the thing that is going to propel me forward. I'm not coming there because, this is going to put me on the scene. If I wanted, I'd reach out to my boy, The Nipples, and the video would get 250,000 views. Like that, like if I was trying to clout chase. So that was not my intention, right? We were there because we were passionate about it. And so if they didn't understand, not just us, but other people as well, I wonder how that abodes for the future when you need to have those stories, because people need to understand. And I think I want to kick it over to you, man. I've been yapping for a little bit. Is that we took a look at the stream. We took a look at the size of the stream, and at its peak, I think, like obviously we're there. Conor and myself, we're just chilling, checking it. It was at peak about 18,000 viewers. And 18,000 viewers for meat of how large it was, and again the scale and what it meant, I would say was low. In my opinion, it was low. I've seen live powerlifting meets before where it was around 10 to 15,000, but all that to say that I am not surprised that it was that amount, considering that when other people wanted to cover it, hype it up, or even athletes wanted to do it, because think about it, Eric, this is a mutually beneficial interaction, right? The athlete covers it, all athletes, and Jess has 250,000 followers on Instagram. And because this is a business, all these things are relevant. She's bringing eyes there, right? So her ability to tell her story, and it wasn't her, but I'm just using Jess because she's a homie, is important and will directly benefit the actual event going on and future events like this. So I thought there was a huge element missing. I am done now. I will say also, with that being said, that's what I said from the word jump. It's certainly one of my favorite. It was that, and quite frankly, Boss of Bosses 2 from a personal experience, Eric, what that means. But I thought the audience loved it. But I'm bringing up why it probably had the viewership it did, why people were confused, and why that is an issue, and why that is probably, like, besides the lifter experience and everything else, like the key issue to fix if they're to go on in the future.
So I will say whatever SBD wants me to say. You can pay me in t-shirts, or we could sponsor a new lectureship in my university. So I think, to be fair to SBD, t-shirts. To be fair to SBD, there was a lot of breadcrumbs where they were trying to do the right thing. So I went back to like the program, and in the program they mentioned Sheffield is the Steel City. So I think I mentioned this to both of you guys. Yeah. I didn't see a lot of that in other parts of the promotion, but I think Sheffield is the Steel City. Sheffield is also a very resilient city in England. So knives and forks used to be the main trade in Sheffield. I went to the museum where I looked at knives and forks, don't judge me. And in the 1800s, Sheffield was the epicenter of like steel making in England and across the British Empire. That industry gets decimated over the next century and a half, where they have to be resilient, they have to reinvent themselves, they have to sort of build themselves up, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, to use an odious term. So you have the Steel City, which I sort of mentioned as one throwaway line, why Sheffield, outside of the clear SBD location comparison. You had the Steel City, you had the resilient city, the city that has built itself back up into something interesting. And that I didn't think was played up enough, like in terms of, the home of steel, like the home of iron, rebuilding oneself. I thought they did try it. So I think that's something to build on. In terms of the narrative, in between the lifts, they had videos of the lifters talking about themselves. Now, it wasn't head to head, like it wasn't Gavin Keiko, but, it was like a headshot of Jess talking to the camera or whoever the lifter was. So I think they were trying to incorporate elements in it. I think there's a lot to build on there. I think they should big up the significance of Sheffield and that sort of steel component, steel, iron. It's a pretty, like it's a underarm throw. Like, I mean, you can knock that out of the park pretty easily. Like even the trophies that were given out, they were inspired by Sheffield's history of steel.
Yeah.
Whereas when Zavickas, who,
Big Z.
oh, I had such a crush.
Yeah.
I was just like doting on him.
He's right in front of us.
Yeah, I missed like the final third of the show. I was just looking at Zavickas. But he went up and he handed out the trophies. They didn't talk about the significance that they had commissioned someone specifically to create a trophy that paid homage to Sheffield's history. So like they were trying to build on the history of Sheffield, but they didn't always like string it all together, particularly cohesively. But I think you can do that really easily next year. Like, I think there's a building pad on that. I mean, like as the nerdy historian, Sheffield's also a cool city because that's the first city that Arthur Saxon beat Eugene Sandow in a weightlifting competition. And I know it was a bent press as opposed to a powerlifting press. I'm just being nerdy. It would have been a fun thing to put in.
Yep.
Sandow sued Saxon because Saxon called himself the Sandow Slayer, or, the man who beat Sandow. Anyway, as a side, I think you're right about the narrative.
Yep.
So I think the closest recent point of comparison to this is the Arnold in the early 2000s. Because when they were building that, the Todds and Arnold and Jim Larmer said, we are putting the powerlifter against the Olympic weightlifter. They tried to get a bodybuilder at it against the strength athlete. And that was the coming together of worlds. And they had that hook, and Sheffield has that hook, champion versus champion. We can have the lightweight lifter against the super heavyweight lifter. Let's see what happens. The Arnold had that hook of, we are, and Terry Todd late Terry Todd wrote an article on it, Iron Game History. It's an amazing insight into the organization of a festival and all of the different threads that they needed to weave in and out. But he said the hook for the Arnold that everyone knew from day one is, this is static strength. So the hook was, World's Strongest Man is an athletic event, quote unquote. Now, he wasn't that blunt, but at the time he was saying, World's Strongest Man is not the test of who the strongest man in the world is. The Arnold is going to be the test of who's the strongest man. And it still is, arguably, because it's more static strength as opposed to sort of, I'd say, feats of athleticism. It's a small F and a small A. I'm like, I love it, but it's not 100-meter sprints. So the Sheffield has the hook of champion versus champion. So I didn't think necessarily they had that world building. Like there were elements to it, but I think that world building perhaps could have been done in a different way. Even like the Olympia, to go back to 1965, Joe Weider was saying, John Grimm, I think was it Larry Scott? Yeah, it would have been Larry Scott. Larry Scott has won the Mr. America. He can't compete in anything else. Alexander has no more worlds to conquer. So what we're doing is we're taking the champions of the champions, and he used that exact phrase, Alexander has no more worlds to conquer. We're bringing them together to see who is the best physique in all of the world, regardless of federations, etc. So you can build those narratives of this is our hook, and I think they did it to an extent, but it could have been bigger. And then you also have the narratives, and one of the reasons why I'm a fan of professional wrestling and strongman and bodybuilding and powerlifting and CrossFit. I need to get hobbies outside of big meaty men slapping meat. But
Disagree.
I found my niche, and I'm going to stick into it. I'm in my home.
Me and you, buddy.
I don't need to grow emotionally. It's fine. But it's narrative based. So like even strongman at the moment doesn't have as strong a narrative as it had 5-6 years ago. Eddie Hall, Half Thor, Zavickas is still there. Brian Shaw is still at his peak. But they still have narratives of lysis, of who's coming back, are we going to see this, are the Stolman's going to be able to continue, etc., etc. Bodybuilding, again, not to the same extent that it had a few years ago, but it was built around narratives.
Yes.
There were several narratives in this that were talked about, but like for me, it was very interesting. Like Jesus is probably going into it, going to break the deadlift record. Now I understand if they didn't want to make that a huge deal because that adds an extra expectation to that athlete. Like if you build this as the event where Jesus is breaking the world record in the deadlift, that is perhaps unfair on A, all of the other champions who are there, but B, it builds an unfair pressure on that individual athlete. But you could have built that a little bit more. Like we're in the home of England. Eddie Hall obviously smashed the deadlift world record in a different context, using different techniques. There was potentially overlaps that could have made, in a narrative sense, Britain is the place that set the standard of the heaviest deadlift in the world. Now we're going to see this natural lifter, this like behemoth, this phenomenon, push the bar even further. So I think they attempted to do these things, which is really promising and really positive. I think to your point, and I mean, it's arguably a little unfair to critique the stream because the Mr. Olympia stream is notoriously quite poor. The Arnold stream is actually very good, I would say. And 99.9% of the time, the Arnold stream is very good. World's Strongest Man, I mean, I usually consume that through people's Instagram stories, and I don't have an Instagram account, so it's really a pain to get onto that. So it's a broader issue in strength sports. CrossFit, I think, does it in a very good way, in a very professional way. I think, and I said this to you about off air, potentially they need to bring people in from soccer in England, from rugby, from cricket, from tennis, and outside production manager. But I think it didn't have the same explosive virality, for want of a better phrase, that if you were to do the Arnold now, if the Todds got together with Jim Larmour and Arnold Schwarzenegger now, did the same pitch, the same hype, I think that would have gone viral a lot more. But I think the ingredients are all there.
Yes.
To really build on this and actually make it that showpiece every year. Now, obviously, there are broader political things behind the scenes that I don't understand, especially with Worlds being so close this year. Like how, from an IPF perspective, how do we weight things going forward? So that's something that I've no knowledge of, and that's interesting. But I think they can build that narrative, and they did it. But I think they can go bigger now that they know it's a success. And I get it because from an athlete perspective, it seemed like you were really well, coaches and athletes were very well treated. And that's a big deal. Athletes were getting big prize money. That's a big deal. But SBD are now sort of first to the market in terms of big prize monies. So I think they have that down. Now they need to, work on all of that outside narrative and media to make it into like the World Cup of powerlifting, the World's Strongest Man, the Arnold, the Olympia, CrossFit Games, which I suppose we should talk about at some point. Just to build it into that broader space, because interestingly, from a fan perspective, one of the reoccurring narratives was so good. Even the bench press was exciting. So like the fans in there loved it. And I think, this lent itself, you mentioned TikTok, 2 TikTok segments of, you don't even like powerlifting. Here's a big dude, pulling a world record off the floor. Here's this, Evie, this light powerlifter. Jesus Christ, like if you didn't know powerlifting, you would, your jaw would hit the floor. So I think that's the next step for this, outside of all the sort of political stuff with a small p of, do we do this at the same time? Is this an equal weighting with Worlds? Is this a higher weighting than Worlds? Because they obviously have to negotiate that. But I think they can play up the significance of it going forward, as has happened in other sports.
If I may, I think I think you guys have some really hopefully useful perspective that would be really good for everyone involved to be aware of and understand.
T-shirts.
Yes. I think there is an important point that the distance between visions and logistics is sometimes a lot greater of a gap than people who have a more visionary perspective. Like honestly, myself and you have, Omar. We almost see, I think, ourselves as stewards of carrying on a tradition and its cultural, historical significance. Mm-hmm. And we know and have personal relationships with the athletes in the sport. We ourselves have practiced it for decades, and we love it. So I think it was really good for me to actually be in the warm-up room area, to be a coach, and to be amongst the athletes, because I was able to see some of the gaps that I wouldn't have seen if I hadn't been there between what I would, as a visionary, love to see and what is possible. Like you said, there are the kernels for all of it, and does need to happen if it wants to get bigger. Yeah. But I understand why some of the things we were discussing didn't get to be in place. So, for example, I love the idea of the elevator shot, but it also would only be for moving up from the warm-up room to the stage. And I don't think necessarily every athlete had the intensity when they were going, all right, I'm 8 people out, and I just warmed up. Most of them are probably just listening to their music. So I think there's an opportunity for a shot, but you could film that and come away with nothing. Yeah. It could just be a bunch of people listening to their tunes and 2 coaches bullshitting, And if there was anything, it might require someone to be performative. Now, to be fair, like we discussed, there's a lot of athletes who are very comfortable being performative. Like I tell you what, I love seeing Delaney Wallace get rid of the lift. You know what I'm saying? And everyone, how they get to their ideal arousal state is different. Another thing to consider is that while there was a ton of room in the warm-up area, and it really could have been, external media there without zero issue. There actually weren't SBD camera people in the hallway where we were sitting, where you waited, and in the area you went up. It was just one person kind of on the stage who unfortunately blocked a lot of Jay's shots. So it means they did a good job. They were getting good shots. So the actual immediate backstage area where we were as coaches and athletes was incredibly crowded, and there just was simply not enough room. And we were all huddled around a monitor. It was basically what you'd normally have a room for. We had a hallway. So that area, which is really where the intensity is and the emotion and the nerves of I'm going to go out there, not immediately, but pretty quick. Just realistically, you couldn't have a person there filming. So that's like, some of these things are potentially worthwhile concessions because the picture from the audience of what was going on stage was incredible. I think some things could be improved, just simply moving out the curtain so the coach's box was a little closer to the platform and just kind of condensing what part of the stage was actually used for the event. And now all of a sudden you've extended that area, and we might be able to have, say, 5 lifters out there, and we'll be able to see the stage, and some of those things are better, and then we can have more film in that area. And I think that could certainly be done. Now, from my perspective, this was the powerlifters' powerlifting meet. SBD, for those who aren't aware, basically started as a bunch of people who trained together in a gym, and then they formed a company, and now they've grown and they've become the brand that is associated with raw lifting, and IPF raw lifting specifically. So I think the people involved, most of them are competitors, and I felt very taken care of. I was reimbursed the vast majority of my flight. I was given, room and board, and I was taken care of, as was Jess. We were fed for the whole time. And I've never had that experience at a powerlifting competition. That was more like when I get asked to speak at a conference, which is cool. Not an academic conference.
Let's just nip that one in the bud straight away.
And that's the big money fitness industry conferences where you
Fitness
make
industrial complex.
the thick.
But again, does SBD want to sponsor a university lectureship? I mean, it's the next boundary, right?
So with that said, I think there are 2 things that need to be done, and you've already spoken about one of them, and I'll just confirm, both of you, that if we want this to extend beyond capturing every single niche of the powerlifting niche, which I think what SBD did. I think if you're a competitive powerlifter, you knew about the Sheffield, especially if you're a raw lifter, especially if you're a drug-free lifter. This was a big deal to you, and this was your World Series, and that's great. And that is a lot of people, and I think by word of mouth and the experience that people had, I think it will grow, but probably unnecessarily organically, meaning limited.
Yep.
The 2 things we need are, 1, the personal stories of the athletes so that non-powerlifters can connect to them on a human level, regardless of what their sport is. Mm-hmm. Because I tell you what, I've been watching this Netflix series about a small, football club that got bought by 2 Hollywood actors, and I do not give a crap about soccer. I'm engrossed in it.
That's not the feel-good story it's being presented as.
I don't care. That's
He's ready to buy into the
millionaires buy football club.
You know what? But they got me in.
I love them, but I mean...
So Eric's saying even with the shitty story, you could turn it into something.
It's not a Cinderella story. The rich person wins is not the Cinderella story. Anyways,
thank you, capitalism.
Yeah, big fan of both.
Nonetheless, I have been brought in, and here's another example. Sure, I grew up in the era of Jordan, and I did watch the Jazz Bulls when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. The Last Dance sucked everyone in, and I'm not a basketball fan. I'm not really a sports fan, if I'm honest, outside of strength sport.
And I took that personally.
And I watched that, and it was really, really good. And I think the important thing is you connect on an emotional level to the athletes. To some degree, that absolutely was intended and was done, but I think it was too superficial. It was too short form, and somewhat biased by the fact that we got to do these long form interviews with 7 of the athletes before the competition. There was a lot of gold that could have been unearthed. With that said, logistically, again, the distance between vision and logistics, some of those things were only unearthed because the athletes knew it was going to come out afterwards. Mm. So, for example, perhaps almost as big of a story as Jesus' historic performance was the fact that Evie Corrigan was coming in as a 57, and she was slated in 12th. Mm-hmm. She was 20 kilos behind the 2 other 57s, and she was just the plucky New Zealander who was going to come in and represent her region, and that's great that she competed. It's awesome that we have a representative at this level. It was basically the underdog story, but no one expected anything out of it. And instead, she came in as a 52 and won. Unbelievable. That was hidden. That was a purposely obscured fact that only came out after Tori on King of the Lifts guest on air. And I think 3 days before the competition, or a week before the competition, Noemi Alibert started following Evie. Wasn't even following her, right? So this was something that even the direct competition of Evie was not aware of until a week before the event. So that storyline is something that you would have to react to and be able to do live on the air. And Ryan and Joe Whiteley, who were the announcers, they did the best they could with that. They mentioned, as soon as the scoreboard popped up, as soon as the stream started, the big upset here is that Evie's coming in as a 52, but that's as good as you can get with that. So while the vision of what Evie's story could have been would have been great to come out months before, oh my God, how's the cut going? Is it going well? She, A, didn't probably want that pressure, and B, didn't want her competitors to be on the lookout and thinking, what kind of numbers are we going to run? What's her top end? Can we scout this out? Because at an event like this, scouting actually does matter. So in some cases, that couldn't have been played up, but it would have been nice, and I don't want us to have this retrospective view. But for example, for the case of Jesus, he had 5 things he was trying to do that were very, tested and untested: total world record, deadlift world record, beat Taylor, and break at 600 dots. And he got all of them except one, So I think that could have been played up. I think it could have been brought into the narrative. And I think that human connection was one thing. And the second thing, like you guys said, and just to reiterate what you said, if powerlifters in the audience were not able to understand what the placing was, I guarantee you, if and when this does go up beyond the powerlifting audience, that will need to be fixed. It's extremely important. But it is harder to do than we think, because it's not as simple as who lifts the heaviest weights wins. It is who's over a certain percentage, and it's shifting constantly. And that's been a logistical challenge that we've been trying to deal with for a while. Every coach I know has a very complex spreadsheet to try to predict this stuff. So SBD was no different. Was no different. They were in a similar position, and as them having the background of being a bunch of powerlifters, I think it is probably challenging to have a perspective outside of the powerlifting experience. So I think everything that happened the way it was is expected. It was, again, the biggest, most important meet. It wouldn't have happened without SBD. I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of it. And from a pure sense of love for the sport, I want to see it expand beyond that and grow, and for powerlifters to get their due. And I really hope that our conversation doesn't come across as a, you should have done this, you should have done this critique, because it's facilitative. Our goal is for the Sheffield to be bigger and bigger and better over time. And it is hopefully, and the only good way to take it if we wanted to improve is to facilitate a better event next time.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I think the one thing, Missy, we're talking about Evie and this sort of a hidden story, and Jesus. Sheffield Hallam has an amazing sport management program. You could just link in with Sheffield Hallam's sport management course. They're all graduate students. They could do this as part of their coursework. On the day of the event, just flood, to use a very odious Steve Bannon quote, just flood the zone with shit. And what I mean by that is just constant repetition, and you can build those stories on the fly. Now, admittedly, they would need to have some knowledge of powerlifting, but you could train them up, I think, to a certain standard. Okay, this is this weight class, this is this weight class, this is why, and it's going up. Potentially in terms of, again, giving back to the community, making it substantive to Sheffield as well as powerlifting, that is something that I think could be thought of for next time. And it would go back to your point about independent media makers, for want of a better phrase, is just giving a little bit of power up for a much greater return in terms of the online as it's going. Because I was on Reddit powerlifting, so scrolling the whole time. The discussions that one would see on the Reddit powerlifting forum were not comparative to the Reddit strongman during an Arnold or World's Strongest Man. I think even 100%. I joke about World's Strongest Man. I consume that predominantly through Instagram stories. Yeah. Because it's not on when it's live, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. That's problematic. But I can consume that through Instagram stories, and even the powerlifters I follow. Admittedly, I'm only on Twitter. No political reason for that. Just I learned how to use Twitter, and then I don't want to learn anything else. I didn't see that same level of virality. Yeah. Something going viral.
Yeah.
Pandemic-y.
Yeah.
Spreads.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
We'll go with virality.
No, let's go with pandemic. Let's make a little bit well. How you get more views?
Yeah. Conor the man. So I think everything that both of you said is exceptionally valid, and it is absolutely not meant to be a critic. Like, you guys should have done this way. I think it's because, and while we're discussing this, I think we're on the precipice potentially of something, and we've been talking about this for a while. We could go over the metrics, the numbers. I have, kind of my hand on the pulse of the way things are going. Powerlifting in terms of overall participation globally, I think is increasing. I think its impact in the greater cultural zeitgeist has been diminishing for quite some time. And so I think in order to sustain global interest, things like this need to be done right. And so I'm speaking on basically behalf of being a powerlifting enthusiast, a spectator, someone that wants the sport to succeed. And that is my first obligation. And then everything else falls from there. And I would say I think what it was, Eric, and I brought up, the only reason why I brought up the History Channel is because I got to give a shout out to that guy, Brian Huffman, the executive producer, where he was in charge. He was given something with a limited budget. He had so many constraints, and he made magic happen given what it was. And that is because he's a professional in that category. This is what he does. And so if you don't have the requisite either expertise or it's a gap, you can't hire it out. And it's absolutely possible. And we brought up the bodybuilding, the Olympia. It's like, well, now that we know what's going on with the IFBB Pro and the way that it's run and the lack of accountability and how it's kind of a mom and pop organization that is bigger. When I say it's bigger than it should be,
It's like a grandpop's son.
son,
Mom and grandpa.
yeah. But when I say it's bigger than it should be, it's being run in such a way that it's not surprising because there's not oversight, right? And I think what it was, Eric, for me, it wasn't, because I was thinking about this, logistically, everything you brought up about backstage valid, but they're unaware of what they're unaware of. And what I mean when I say that is that really what they needed for this would be a legitimate content producer, someone that would know how to shape the narratives, someone as an example, and that's why I brought up where I said, like, full disclosure, like where I might, like, I flew out, I want to hang out with Eric, we wanted to cover this. We could have gotten any of the interviews with athletes on our own. We have personal connections or connections with the coaches of the we know everyone. So having the opportunity to sit down, while it was cool, we could have facilitated that one on our own. But the reason why, and this is our own bias, but it is a bias that I strongly believe, that we got, at least what's been released so far, by far the strongest, most emotionally impactful interviews from the athletes is because we had the personal connection, but more importantly, we understood the sport, we understood who they were, we gave them the opportunity, and some of this stuff will be coming out after, and there's so many like hidden stories, and that's like a whole other like podcast or issue to talk about, like the athlete stories, which really tie everything together, is because we knew what we're going for. And so judging by the way things were filmed and what was set up and so forth, there were just missed opportunities because I think they weren't even aware opportunities were there. And that, in terms of putting on events at this level, become increasingly important, especially because we're talking, when we give the figure of 18,000 viewers, this had the potential, and you only need to see what's going on the TikTok. Like, just think as an example, we got, so shout out, like Gavin Aiden, Mr. Burn the Ships. So I'm joking when I say this, but like, I can show my mom, I could show Moya Micah, my mother, I could show her online some UFC pride stuff. She doesn't like violence or anything, but you could put on some of the preamble stuff. You could show the documentaries, the Agony and Ecstasy, that they cover, that they call it, or you could show some of the quasi documentaries, Anatomy of the Fighter, the independent media, but he's given full access. And my mom could get emotionally invested. She's like, oh, I respect the martial discipline. George St. Pierre, I respect that. And if you could get my mother into that, let's say it's like, you could not, and again, that's a different level, but it's possible. And we know from having the connections with the athletes and their personal stories, and some of these, like, we've not discussed any of them, they're poignant, they're powerful. Like, there are times where Jay was saying that we're like, we were getting emotional while we're just interviewing, right? Like, so it's there. We know it's there. We know the potential possibility, and that's why we want to see it grow. And as a joke, so instead of getting off the high horse now, this is not that like, this is what you guys should have done, but there are personalities there, man. Like Gavin Aiden, he's a character in a good way. meaning that he's performative. He talked about, his kind of mantra was burn the ships. Well, if each person, you understand them more in a 3D way, and let's say you could go early, Eric. You go early to the event, and there's a 30-minute hype up where they'll just blah, 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 and then you understand, they would have understood everything. It's like, and the guy, and then you sit down like Ryan Lapidat, right? So like they do the kind of like hype up, Eric, 30 minutes. And you interview guys like Ryan Lapidat. Well, I think the key fight here, like the key like event here, the battle that we want to see is like we have this and that, and they could reveal because it's 30 minutes out. Evie Corrigan, it's like, what man, people don't know. It's like, oh shit, and you build this thing up, right?
So during the weigh-ins, at some point, it became official knowledge of what Evie's weigh-in was.
Yes.
If we had a mic, from the officials to say Ryan and like, oh, fill in this sheet as the weigh-ins come in. There would have been an opportunity. Now, full disclosure now that we're after the fact, I knew Evie was cutting weeks out because I'm part of NZPF. And I also spotted on her Instagram that she was looking diced and I'm a bodybuilding coach. And then I basically just asked Jason and her and they were like, yeah. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, I'm not like, I know they kept it secret from me because I'm also coaching Jess and I could be competing with them. But ultimately, Jess and I were there to break potentially the squat world record and go for the deadlift and then to see where the chips fell. So I wasn't really a threat. I couldn't utilize that information, but I've known for weeks. And because of that, and because of the fact that Ryan, just as many connections as we have, Ryan has more in the powerlifting community. So Ryan was also aware of this more than a week out. So he could have very easily, once that weigh-in came in, spent that 90-minute period of the weigh-ins hyping that up, going over all the things that Jesus was going for, talking about the burn the ships mentality of Gavin, the potential issues that, Taylor Atwood was dealing with, which, I'm not going to go into depth on that, but there's a reason why he had a low total for him and all the things he was trying to overcome, the adversity he faced. And this is, of course, all done in consultation with the athletes. Hey, here are some things. What are you comfortable with me talking about? It's a list of each athlete Ryan could have for during the warm-up hype up, and if at this point Taylor's like, what, they know what's up, so sure, to let them know about what I've faced. Same thing with Leah, similar, but she was still able to come back and break the world record. So these opportunities to overcome adversity and these surprises from Evie and these historic performances from Jesus that people are going for, and the local underdog story of Mo, all these things can be reiterated in the 90 minutes immediately prior to the competition. And then at least the people who are tuning into the live stream are going to be like, oh shit. And then what's happening during the live stream? People are talking about it online, texting each other, messaging. And I think we would have seen that peak of 18, and then we would have seen a peak of 24, and we would have seen a peak of 36.
Because people keep talking about it, and that's how it happens.
That's...
real quick, I was going to say, like, this to me was indicative of kind of like, there not being, when I say like a executive, like content producer, just someone like thinking about the theatrical aspect, which is paramount. So I joked, and there's a joke and then a serious point. The joke is like, before they come out, so let's say it's like Gavin Aiden, right? Mr. Burn the Ships. Cool, he has his mantra. Before he goes out, let's say he's going to do his deadlift attempt, the announcer who had a great balance between being a very professional, but also giving some flavor, would say, it's like, let's hear it. He has like Gavin Aiden, and then they show on the big screen, which they had some nice big screens, and they'll play like a 3-second sizzle. You don't think an athlete would get hyped up, and you pre-screen this. So Gavin comes up for his third deadlift, and his audio and it shows his face where he says like, I'm ready to burn the ships or whatever. And he comes out, he would get himself hyped up. Jesus, like the same idea, or Taylor, I heard this, I don't think it was captured on the live stream. Taylor said after the second squat, because Taylor, he has that dog in him. He said, I fucking want it. Come give it to me.
Yeah, he can't control himself, which I love, how genuine it is. But he was out there after his second squat, like, put it on the bar, let's go, Yeah. And I think that's the type of thing that you can facilitate.
Yeah.
I do think it's very important, and I'm firm on this, that you're willing to sacrifice the theatrical nature of it if not all of the athletes consent.
Of course, of course.
So I think that is a key thing, and none of us are saying that you just do this and it's the cost of the greater good. I think you have an athletes meeting, an athlete press meeting, and you say, hey, we got all 24 in the room. Here are some things we're thinking. What are we comfortable with?
Yep.
And it should be done in consultation with the people who are actually the people with the sports built on the athletes. So to be clear, I just want to make sure everyone understands that. But then you can have that occur 72, 96 hours before the event. Most of the athletes are coming out early to acclimate to the time change difference. I wish I had as well. I'm still jet lagged, but I'm not bitter about it. And then you can actually decide, hey, what can we do? What can't we do? Here are the constraints. Now let's optimize within those to really maximize the viewership.
Oh, a Brian Whitaker-ism. I love it. Shout out. The part that I was going to say that was indicative about not having a content producer in order to shape some of this stuff. So it happens. The event's over, right? Jesus does it. So what was great, because Jesus was a super heavy. This is the easier part to understand. He's last to come out. The announcer can say it, so it's understood, whereas with Evie is a lot harder. Okay, well now you can get the person, and we all love Big Z around here, but you get an announcer to come out and say, in third place, and they come out cool. And then after they come out, my God, take 2 to 3 minutes to go up to them, to like Evie, and say like, Evie, this is historic. The first ever Sheffield. Yep. No one expected you to win it. Not like it, but like you understand, it's like you came out of nowhere and you absolutely shattered things. How does it feel? And they'll talk about it. Oh my God. Now people are getting emotionally invested. Now when Evie comes back, the defending Sheffield champion, Jesus, same idea. You did something no one thought was possible to break not only the all-time tested record, but untested record, a record, the tested one, that people thought Ray was going to have for years and years, if not decades. This is historic. How does it feel? It's that simple. Instead, they got the thing that looked like a cinder block, which is cool. Like it was like with the significance,
to Sheffield significance.
Yeah,
right.
But they didn't. But they didn't say it, and then they're just like this. And then like, all right, get the fuck off the stage. And that was it. Yeah. And that was it. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like,
when they spat on them and tore their shirt pockets.
So it's kind of it's kind of like, you know, you did something. There's something that happened, and then afterwards, like, you good? Like, we had a good like, what's going on? I was like, there's none of that. There's no. Go ahead.
And it's been done. Like, we just recently had Powerlifting America Nationals, and they did very straightforward yet very impactful and really well received athlete interviews after each weight class is finished.
Yep.
They just sat down with them, talked to them, like they talked to each one of the lifters after the performance, and people loved it. People were talking about it a lot at the Sheffield.
Yep.
So this is like, it's not a novel idea. It's done in normal sports. It's done in other sports. Got to be nice to myself. We're big now. We're big.
Normal sports.
Normal sports.
As a historian of sports.
Real
normal sports. Okay.
It's done in It's done in other sports, Connor. And it has recently been done in powerlifting, and I think it's been very well received. And it really doesn't take much. So I think I completely reiterate that even if someone was a little bit lost, the thing we remember is the last thing that we tune into. Mm-hmm. So even if they were a little unclear on where things were at, yep. When you find out at the last moment, oh shit, Evie was going to be a 57, and even though I saw her finish lifting 10 minutes ago, no one could catch up to her and beat her, and she won against all odds. That's pretty cool. And then it reframes everything that happened for you the last 30 minutes. The confusion doesn't matter anymore.
Well, to your point, I mean, I see SBD are like drip feeding content at the moment, but I think one of the things they should consider going forward is actually creating those after tournament packages, because now you can do this awesome 3-minute story, Evie, the underdog who no one expected. You can do this 3-minute story, Jesus. You can do a 3-minute story, Gavin versus Kaiko. Like, you can do these really cool stories. So it'd be interesting if that's something to consider going forward, even if you can't do it at the event, because I get it, there's a million things like that you have to make sure go right. And if it goes wrong for the athletes, that's ultimately the big problem. But I think there needs to be a sense of ownership over this, and that it's not just, like you said, Jesus, here's a trophy, I'd see you later, but it is having, multiple ways of repackaging this, because for a lot of people who aren't as committed, they like powerlifting, but they don't want to watch a live stream for the entire day. You can do like to use a football comparison, a match of the day program, do these little lifting packages around the battles that came up during the competition, around Jesus' story. You can interview him. Do you have any pictures of training this year that we can use from your own media? Yep. If athletes consent to that and are happy to have their likenesses used, etc., etc. But I think it is about using the content now, because even to your point about narratives, like pumping iron, overly confident jackass. Like, this is how Arnold portrays himself. Lou is the underdog with his dad. Like, this is an incredible battle between this plucky underdog who's very nervous, he's not confident in himself, and then Arnold, who's like supremely confident. Generation Iron, they tried to do it again. Phil Heath was the gift. Kai Green was, the working class boy with this terrible background who's managed to overcome all of these things to be an elite level bodybuilder. didn't go as well as pumping iron, but I respected the narrative that they're trying. The Strongest Man on Earth, the documentary about the Arnold Strongman show, is Eddie Hall going to die on a platform? Because then that is a narrative throughout that thread, is Eddie Hall is pushing the bounds. Zavickas is this incredible Iceman. You know, you have Hafthor, who is this plucky up-and-comer, and it's funny to think of Hafthor as a plucky up-and-comer in any context. But those narrative stories are what ultimately get the broader audience. And I think even just if you have a shot of like Kaiko before he goes on stage, I could show that to my mother and she'd be like, oh shit, something's...
He's ready.
He's right. Like, I don't know, is he about to tear a building in half? Like, what is this? Oh, it's a barbell. Okay, that's safer. You know, so I think there is content there that they can play with. And like bodybuilding didn't become popular in the 70s and 80s because people wanted to put on thongs and go on stage. Bodybuilding got popular in the 70s and 80s because that narrative in pumping iron made it really cool. CrossFit did not get as popular because of, you know, the variety of the training modalities, but online content built narratives around CrossFit. And then the CrossFit Games built narratives around the athletes, and the athletes are probably some of the shrewdest people in the iron game in terms of their own likeness and reaching out to their own communities. So the narrative is ultimately what matters here, not necessarily the results. And even I say that about, you know, Jesus' record as a historian of strength, that is awesome. People outside of powerlifting won't care about that unless I give them the narrative of this 24-year-old who's just fucking come out of nowhere in the last few years. The narrative draws people in, and that's the next step, because I think they've done the competition very well. They've already begun to incorporate bits of the narrative, both within Sheffield, this is us giving back to our own local community, and then within powerlifting, doing the interviews with athletes. But they need to think about the stories. And as a fan of professional wrestling, any wrestling fan will tell you it is all about the stories. Any fan of bodybuilding, I explain it to people through stories. Who's the reigning champion? Who's the up-and-comer? Oh, they didn't get on stage. Phil and Kai shoved each other on a stage. That shouldn't have been interesting, but it's all we talked about. In a strongman show, oh, he's coming back from injury. He's been out. He's on the downswing. He's on the upswing. That's where you get people in. That's where ultimately, even as fans, you get that extra flavor and spice. So it is just about thinking of, you have all of this content now, and not leaving money on the table by saying, oh, we did a competition. It's like, no, you're doing a theatre performance as well as a great competition.
Well said.
No, gents, there's been so much covered here, and I think now that we've reached this point, maybe one final thing I'll say on it, and I want to reflect then on favorite moments for us, like personal moments, like what we observed, just to kind of wrap it all up and get the excitement going maybe for the next Sheffield or the next iteration of whatever it might be. And that would be that with iron culture, it's always for all lifters. And so I think it's important not to gatekeep any community. And that's why we are actively trying to enlist new participants in the sport we love. We accept and are open at all. And so you need to make it understandable. And I think that's why we brought up the whole concept of like whoever or whatever team could help shape these things. And while you're describing that, I had visions in my head, right? And you get, no matter what sport you're in, we're so deep in the thick of it that we naturally build up these narratives because we know what's going on. Like Eric knew about Evie, so he's like, this is exciting. Like she's not supposed to win, but I think she has a good chance. He had inside knowledge. Or us, like with the stuff with Taylor, they'll come up with herself, like battling some setbacks and whatnot. That's like, man, Taylor's got that dog in him. Can he do that? No one knew. And that's why, as you said, the screening beforehand would be powerful. But I could say this from speaking to a lot of the athletes, that a lot of them are hungry for that type of content, and they could pick and choose. Like, Jesus, he's the man. He won. He went to bed at 2 a.m. I did an interview with him 10 hours later in the morning for a whole hour, and he was down. He was the whole, I was like chilling with his brothers like the night before. He wanted it, right? He wanted to share a story. It's like something was left off the table. And if you think about that, this would be very easy to do. And all these ideas are free. You could use them. You can steal them, whatever you want. As we spoke about like that. That's why I joked the ending of Star Wars: A New Hope.
No.
They want free shirts.
No, they pay me.
Yeah, they pay my man. And
I'm on a universal salary. Conor gets paid.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to say shout out.
At least 3 shirts.
3.
Yeah.
Small. I trade.
Okay.
Small, medium, and large. I'm not sure which size I'm going.
Yeah. I'm the schmedium. I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I was gonna give a shout out to the like the professor. Whereas your first thought was like, okay, how do we get free labor? Okay, we're gonna get some like students to do it. I'm like, but that is, but
Experience.
but it's not a bad idea. And what I was gonna say, just real quick, like as another example, because I think wrapping it up, Eric, to what people see. Oh my God, you do the interviews the whole time. This would not take a lot of work. That if you have the live feed and someone's downloading and you have editors, after it's done, you have the sizzle reel, the hypes it after. So you wrap it up, and that's why you have the interviews. It gives them the 10, 15, 20 minutes necessary to have, like, you know, the 2 minutes. You have the Jonathan Keiko. You have that one where, like, that scene, everything coming together, the Sheffield, boom, the wrap up, records fell, boom. So you have all, and this, like, I'm telling you, for making content, this would be incredibly easy to make. You just need to have the eye for it, where you have all the pre-made pieces, Eric. So the narrator said records fell. That was a safe assumption. So you're just slotting in key moments that probably were going to happen. Then, oh my God, Jesus, his last deadlift. And that's the hype up reel at the end that gets people. It's like, and then just from their own business perspective, the announcer did say, like, will we see you next year? It's like, you don't ask. You say, like, Sheffield 2024, the hype star. It's like, this one's personal. Like, well, yeah, that's like a wrestling style one. But like,
harder.
Right? Yeah, die harder. So I'll just say that hopefully this sounds like the number one comment I'm joking for this podcast. Like, why didn't you guys just talk with, like, SBD or whoever? And, you know, there will potentially be conversations. We try to have some of these conversations beforehand, and it's more just our personal thoughts. Are we saying it's necessarily the best way? But it comes from a place of love, in particular, love of the sport, the athletes, and the audience first and foremost. And with that being said, I want to kick it over to you, Eric, because you're behind the scenes, it might be harder to say favorite moments that are like that apply for the entire event, and maybe they're more personal. But I want to just go through our maybe favorite moments, because I do think this was certainly a meet for the books, and I do think, you know, as time goes on, this will be a historic event.
I have two favorite moments, and they are very personal because they were my experience at Sheffield was personal. This was maybe the highlight of my coaching career thus far.
Yep.
Potentially the same as or just behind when Bryce won the 2018 World Championship.
Yep.
I was unable to speak full sentences to Bryce for at least 15 minutes, and he was like, "Okay, you need to stop crying. This is embarrassing for you and everyone around." And my first Worlds. So those are moments where you kind of look up and you go, wow, like all this stuff. I've been on a laptop coaching athletes, trying to help them, talking, sending Excel spreadsheets, and now I'm traveling to another country to help someone compete at the peak of their sport. It's a wild thing to reflect on, and it brings you a sense of honor and perspective and gratitude and humility that I think I like to revisit. And the two moments for me in this competition were when Jess finished her third squat and her third bench. And it was this happy feeling of she's going to sprint at me and jump into my arms, and I might die because Jess is stronger than me, carries more muscle mass, and she is extremely excited. And she just showed that she could blow up a 220 squat and a 107 bench press. I hope I live to help on her next attempt. But having to plant my back foot and get ready to take this linebacker charge and just the joy on her face, honestly, it's like some of the top 10 moments of my life, because when you see someone who is so immersed in their passion succeeding and then celebrating it, that's one thing I love about Jess, is that she loves lifting. She is a lifter's lifter. She's an athlete, and being on stage in front of 2,000 people didn't diminish it. It didn't distract her. How much was riding on this? The fact that she was potentially going for as much as like 10, 12,000 pounds, or if I miss, I might not get it. That didn't stop her from being there, not only at her best. She went 8 for 9 and took a shot on a world record. Incredibly proud of her, but also didn't stop her from enjoying it. And that's hard. That's hard to do. And it enabled me to actually enjoy it. Because to say that I was nervous would be a drastic understatement. I'd like to think I hit it well. That's my role as a coach, is to be the rock and know what I'm doing, to over-prepare, which I needed to do for my own sanity. But if anyone saw me on game day, I was on game day. So those moments where she was just purely celebrating allowed me to as well. And I'm very grateful for that.
So I will end up going with the obvious, but Evie's story was incredible from start to finish. I loved Joy and Mo's interactions with the home crowd, especially Mo being like that underdog who came in, and like it was such a strong performance. I like big meaty men lifting heavy weights. So I was only ever going to say Jesus. And I know that's a very basic bitch answer in the context of what we will probably say our favorite moments are. But my God, I think I spent the first third of that show just saying to myself over and over again, he's 24. Just like a mantra over and over, he's 24, he's 24, he's 24. Like a point that Jay said, I just cannot fathom a 24-year-old structurally can hold that much weight on their back in a squat. I just can't fathom that a 24-year-old has the like chutzpah to, you know, paraphrase from some of my friends across the water in England, to pull that much from the floor. So for me, it's the big meaty man, like defying all, not even defying expectations, like because we all expected a huge performance, but to see that in the flesh from someone so young, and to think about his ceiling in the context of seeing what he's doing now, for me was a favorite moment, because I felt like, okay, these are all champions, and this is someone in Jesus that is they're all generational because they're all champions, but this is potentially a generational champion that I can get, 2 million views on TikTok. Here's Jesus, pulling this from the floor. So the basic answer, big man, big weights. Yep.
I'll just say there is a few, but I'll say, Eric, I was incredibly proud of you as a friend, as a business partner. Iron Culture, shout out. The first thing I actually did.
Is it business now?
Business. It still is a business if you lose money.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm not. We're not letting go of the hand, because I was going to say, Jay can attest to this. The first thing that I filmed when Jess came out wasn't Jess. I actually took a photo of Eric. I took a few, just because it is that moment, and this is why personal connections. Oh God, this is the topic right here of like seeing you, and also knowing that Jess, who is a very good friend, that she was taken care of, that like everything that could be done would be done, and that this is a seminal moment in powerlifting, and you're representing it well. It's like when I saw my man Ben, I also took a photo of Ben, my boy Ben, because he was there with Leah, his athlete, and then when he challenged it, like it was just sensational. I'd say on a personal level, it was all the personal connections, right? And that's why we bring it up. So those, and then selfishly for myself, interacting, because it's my first time in the UK, and the amount of people that I interacted with, like Emil Krastov said, like I got in powerlifting because like 8 years ago, like I was watching your content, I was like, and it actually reinvigorated some things. And I don't mean like, oh well, you watch myself, like that's cool, but I mean like it's all one long chain that's connected. Yep. And what I mean when I say that, there's like SBD, Taiwan, Singapore, and United Arab Emirates, Ubaid, like who came, each and every one. Nomi's Yusuf, her coach. Like, and it's like, it wasn't me. It's that I'm an avatar of experience of a line. And as you said, stewards, I actually, when you said that, that was like the one of that you like this, you, as they say, live, learn, pass on, that you're just merely being the avatar, the window with which to get into this. And then you go on and you carry the torch. And that's why Milo off camera, where I was talking with him and Pac, this is separate, but like the next generation of evidence-based, like communicators, like, where I said you're carrying the torch forward, is like what it is, like it sounds like you're like giving up like what you're doing. I said no, in fact, if anything, I feel reinvigorated just on a personal level that we managed to come to this point, so I could be proud of my friends, proud of the athletes, proud of all the participants, like seeing like it was a who's who that showed up there that made it into this moment. So that to me was probably the most obviously personally significant. And then from the historic kind of lift, and if I may then for the lifting, it actually probably was Jonathan Keiko from his lifting, just because we know his story, that we're gonna like talk to him and see what comes out. But I've never seen a person more dedicated before, and you believe it. You believe it, where he had a lot riding on it. His third squat that he gave, where he did not give up, he battled through it. It was like 1 white, 2 reds. But then that is why the moment before the deadlift where he wins, you see it and you believe it, and that is, at once people know the story, they'll understand why that was so important. And then the beautiful, almost anime, because him and Jesus love anime, turnover where he posted, and he said that to me before. He said, if there's one person I'm okay with beating it, it's my brother Jesus. He literally said that before the competition, and then that's what happened, because he was saying to us before, like on camera, he said, like, this means everything. This is the most important meet. I want to win, da-da-da. But he has that grace and humility to know that for himself, that he could step aside, because it's also important for his brother Jesus to do it. So that's why that moment's so important. And what's the common thread there? We all know the inside details. And then from the historical context would be Jesus. So I'm also just basic, big meaty men doing big hunky things.
Feel free to use that as a slogan.
Yeah, that should be Sheffield 2024. Yeah.
I did steal it from wrestling, but it's fine.
No, I mean,
They're IP. It's fine.
yeah, they're totally not good.
They're totally fine.
Yeah, but I do think we've covered a lot when it comes to Sheffield. I want to open the floor. I don't even know how long. It doesn't matter, because guess what? You're in it, you're listening to it, you're feeling it. And it is cool to have that personal accounting between the three of us, because we were there. We understand the ins and outs kind of the sport. Is there anything that you two gents want to cover before kind of we wrap it up? Because I thought it was like good. It was like, is that compliment sandwich where we start off with the hype train? It's like, here's what we do, like here, or here's where we could see it, because we all saw the vision of something more. And I think that's the important headline there. And then kind of talking about the favorite parts. Eric, Conor, please.
I think you should finish out. I'll just say, what cannot be underestimated here is that this potentially, I'm not saying I wish this or it would have done because the organization was so good, this could have gone disastrously.
Yeah.
There is an alternative reality. So, I mean, Vince McMahon creates the World Bodybuilding Federation in 1992.
Yep.
He's paying the athletes more. He's adding so much narrative that he actually gives people characters and storylines. He books out a huge arena. He puts it on pay-per-view. And it folds within 2 years.
Yep.
But like on paper, you know, like we said all these things, like paying the athletes are treated better than arguably they were with Weider Federation at the time. You know, he was adding narrative, he was adding flavor. There's professional aesthetics being added to it, because he was using his media training from the WWF, and it fell flat on its face.
Yep.
So I think, you know, we also have to put it into that context of people have taken it to the absolute extreme of all the things that we've said.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's gone dreadfully.
Yep.
But I just think, it is a success in and of itself. I think for fans of powerlifting, so much can be built on this to infiltrate outside of the hardcore powerlifters. I think you should have final words.
Final words, I would say, I have a lot of gratitude. That's really where I am at the moment. I think to you, Omar, you just kind of put the bug in Jess's ear. Hey, you know, you're a little burned out on powerlifting. You want to do some bodybuilding. You know, I know a guy. Brought her on the podcast and basically on air pitched that I could be her bodybuilding coach. Made sure the personal connection happened, because for those who don't know, I only take on very few athletes because I have a lot of things I do, but I still love coaching and I still coach. So the fact that you helped Jess get to a point where she was comfortable with me, and then allowed us to start that almost now 3 years of working together is a huge honor. I'm also very grateful to Jess. Obviously, it wasn't like Omar made you work with me, and it's just an incredible privilege and honor to be in your corner. So those are two things that I'm grateful for. And honestly, I am grateful to SBD, because we can critique something only if it exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. There.
And I would say that our critiques, like I said, I want to say they are positively critical. And I think you had an excellent point with that this could have gone poorly. And to be clear, this went well.
Yes.
Yeah, it went well.
Yes.
I think this was a success, and it was a huge honor to be a part of it. And I think you can hear in all of us that we were excited about it, and it was an incredible experience. So I really just don't want anything that we're saying to be misconstrued as anything beyond, man, this was awesome, and we want to see it be awesome for many, many years and continue to improve and to really build up our sport to what we know it can be and what it can feel like for other people, even if they don't lift. Because I think that's the mistake we've been making, because we haven't even seen the capability that powerlifting could be more than it is. As we go, well, if people get it, they get it, and the only way to get it is to lift.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily true, but it will take some outside of the box thinking for us as a community to get to that point where we can reach others and connect with people who don't actually spend their time doing the squat, the bench, and the deadlift as heavy as possible.
There are monster episodes. There's monstrous episodes, as someone said. And this is a personal favorite just because I think it's important. You can give, the immediate reaction. You can give it a few days, which is what we've done. You can reflect then months, years after. But I think it's a very truthful account of what we personally saw go down. And so for yourself, Eric, when you said you have gratitude, I have attitude, because gratitude is the attitude. I will say that Jess is the homie, though, where I knew that for herself, and we had those conversations, that you would be like, I think you would have done a phenomenal job, and you guys would gel. So I'm super happy for her that she made the choice to work with you, and that you also had the bandwidth and everything worked out. Just because you want to see, it's like you want to see the best possible athletes perform at their best. And so on a personal level too, selfishly seeing two people that I both really like work together, it's like seeing Ben and Leah together, do their thing. It creates that connection. And that's what I was thinking about. You talk about gratitude, absolutely. It's those personal connections along the way. And maybe the last thing that I would say, Eric, is that I understand more now after this event why Ed Cohen, 10 years after he finished competing, when he was asked what was his favorite memories, the best parts about powerlifting, he said it was the memories and the friends he made along the way and the connections. And I'm not trying to get too like hunky-dory with that by framing it that way, but I think it also was a great full circle moment for the journey we've been on and the journey powerlifting has been on. And that is the end of the episode, which we'll say, I just want like Conor was going to pitch us
live, laugh, love, but
live, laugh, love, eat, pray, love.
Eat, pray, love. Maybe Sheffield was the friends we made along the way.
I will say that we're thankful for everyone who made it all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this podcast, you could go ahead and leave a rating and review. 5 stars is typically what they give. I will leave it to your own discretion to make your own independent thoughts, of which, of course, you have them. This is an autonomous, a way of thinking. 5 stars. We'll catch you in that next episode. It's every single insert date here. And we'll see you from now until the end of time. Until next time.